Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We're here to recap week 2 around the SEC. As if you're watching the videos, you might be able to see I'm still in a hotel room here in Jacksonville, just finished up covering the Jacks Classic. It was a lot of fun there. We're obviously going to talk about that. We'll talk about Oklahoma and their big weekend in Round Rock. We'll talk about Arkansas at Globe Life, and then we'll do kind of a whip around to give you the rest of the results. A lot to get to, not as much as what we'll have to get to in the future. It still feels like a little bit of an imbalance. There's some fun stuff to talk about, and then a lot of stuff that's not all that interesting to talk about, frankly. But don't worry, folks. Week 3 looks strong, and then conference play is not too far away. So we will get there eventually. Enjoy maybe the slower pace before we get into the chaos of SEC play. But Mark, I hope you stayed a little warmer than the folks in Round Rock and that I was in Jacksonville, at least on Friday. It was kind of a brutal weekend weather-wise in a lot of places.
It was, man. I mean, and that's the deal, because of all the bad weather, you had a lot of schedule alterations, double headers and moving games around and all that. So it was a little more challenging to follow. And the other part of this is everyone most of the people moved their games to daylight hours because you didn't want to be out at night in this weather. So it was just kind of a different. I was at home this weekend, and it was a different viewing experience because all of the games were in the day, and there was very little, staggered throughout the day. And usually, you can kind of follow a little bit at a time, and it was just it was an all you could eat buffet, and then they took it away, and I kind of like being able to go back for seconds and thirds.
Yeah, it was all you could eat buffet, but you only got to go one time around. You had to put as much on your plate as you could, and then that was it. Yeah, it was. That's a really good point. It did feel like that. I got back Saturday night from covering games in Jacksonville. I got back to my hotel and was like, "All right, what do we got?" And it was pretty much just Arkansas and TCU.
Yeah.
And I don't even just.
And that was a great game, but
usually,
there's the whole multi-screen experience going on, and you couldn't do that.
I don't even mean just in the I mean in general, it felt like that was really the only game going on. So anyway, it was obviously it'll be a little bit more scattered as time goes on. Let's start with Oklahoma, Mark. I feel like that's the headline here. I highlighted it in my SEC Series of the Week piece and talked about it on Waypoints. This was the series of the weekend. Oklahoma taking on Minnesota, which it's better than some of these squash games, but you just don't know what Minnesota is or isn't. Although Minnesota won against Oregon State on Sunday, so maybe Minnesota is going to be a quality win. We'll see. But the big win, obviously, against Oregon State for Oklahoma on Saturday. And then as we record this, they are in the 9th inning, tied 4-4 with Virginia.
Yeah.
Made it to where Mark and I just kind of needed to get this show on the road, but we'll circle back if that result comes in while we are on the air. So by now you know the result, but we will circle back if that goes final. But Mark, as you followed Oklahoma in this tournament, because I was in Jacksonville and you were at home, you probably actually had a chance to see a little.
I watched a good bit of
than I did. So so give me your impressions of Oklahoma from this weekend.
Well, they were the underdogs twice this weekend. So, you kind of expected them. You're playing 2 top 10 teams, and even though we think highly of you, you're not them. I was expecting 1-2, and they're sitting at, 2-0 and tied in the 9th inning with a chance to be 3-0, really in anybody's game kind of thing. So I've come away really impressed with Oklahoma. The pitching has been as good as advertised, especially the starting group. The Witherspoon brothers both pitched well, but Kyson on Friday against Minnesota was just dominant, man. I mean, what was the strikeout total? Was it like 12 strikeouts? Or anyway, it was a lot. And
I can tell you dominant. To put numbers on it, I can tell you to this point of the season, he has a 21-2 strikeout to walk ratio and 12 innings and change.
Yeah, he's going to win a lot of games this year. But the part about Oklahoma that we all questioned is what what would that rebuilt lineup look like? And would they be able to hit for power, and how would they produce runs? And you look at their lineup, and there's some speed in it, and there's some bat to ball skills. The question is, what, how would that translate against the top competition? And boy, based on this weekend, it did really well, and that should give them a lot of confidence, because they're playing the Oregon States and the Virginias, and to most teams playing those clubs, those are the best teams you'll play all year. Well, that's not the case for Oklahoma, because they're going to play an SEC schedule where you're going to run into that kind of talent, if not every week, every other week. So for them to have success with all these new players, that has to embolden you and give you confidence as you get ready to play those teams. So I'm really bullish on what Oklahoma showed. Granted, it's one weekend, but it's stiff competition, and they played well enough that you have to feel like once they get into SEC play, they're not going to be skittish. They know that they belong, and they'll be able to compete.
Yeah, the pitching has, I threw some numbers together. I mentioned Kyson's numbers. Also, in addition to 21-2 strikeout to walk ratio, a 119 opponent batting average. His brother Malachi has been not quite as good, but still been very good.
How could he be?
Right, exactly. It's a tough standard. He's holding opponents to a 182 batting average. And I've been somewhat encouraged by what I've seen from Cam Johnson, because maybe my level of expectation was different than some other folks, but there was a lot of positivity coming out of the fall about Cam Johnson. But I still never really thought it was just going to be automatic day one. Hey, look, he's an ace type pitcher, but he has done more in his 2 starts there than he did in really any of his outings at LSU, in terms of, yes, there's been traffic. Yes, he's allowed some runs, but he's fighting through things a little bit.
He needs to pitch, right?
Yeah.
He needs to get the ball every 7 days and go out and learn and grow and develop. And and he's certainly pitching well enough right now to continue to get the ball. And I feel like his upside is so high that once it clicks, you've got yet another ace on that staff. And it's just a question of how long is it going to take? And will it be this year even, right? I mean, it's guys they're on different paths, and some take longer than others. And we don't know where his is, but we know once he gets, or assuming he's able to tap into that, the high 90s fastball and the hard slider, and get that to work, you really have something then.
Yeah, I'm bullish. I just think we're just going to be patient with him, and the fact that Kyson and Malachi have pitched so well, I think gives Oklahoma the space to be patient with him and just be like,
he didn't have to go out. Yeah, he didn't have to be the ace. He can be the Sunday guy.
Yeah, I said it on Waypoints this morning. Like, as a Sunday guy, it's just, hey, go out there and give us a chance to win. And as we sit here tied 4-4 to Virginia, he did that. Check. Yeah. 2 weeks in a row, he checked that box. So I'm fairly bullish on it. And then offensively, a couple things have stood out to me. One is that Kyle Branch is the standout freshman. There was a lot of hype about Drew Dickerson as a freshman, and he really hasn't had much of an impact so far. But Kyle Branch has come in, and he's coming into today's game against Virginia, he was batting .500 for the year. That'll play. Pretty aggressive swinger. We'll see how that plays in SEC play. As of the Virginia game, he didn't have a walk yet this year. Like, obviously he's gonna have to take some pitches in SEC play maybe to carry over that kind of success. And then the other thing is that, like, Easton Carmichael appears to have taken another step forward. Like, he's always been a solid player, but he really does seem like he's taken a step into being like, hey, this is the centerpiece of the lineup. This is a all SEC type of guy. And that's what one of the things that this Oklahoma lineup needed going into the year that we kind of had questions about. And at least through, a handful of games, he has answered that question in the affirmative.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've gone to the bottom of the ninth, tied at 4. So Oklahoma has a chance to walk it off here. So this would be, for a team that we didn't really know much about. What an incredible weekend. It's already been a great one, right, to be at this position. But if they cap this with a victory, I mean, they're the team of the week nationally.
Agreed. Yeah, they've already done enough to really catch our attention. There's a reason we're leading
Mm-hmm.
with them, even though we don't know the result of this Sunday game yet. We haven't had our top 25 meetings yet, but I presume they're going to be in this week. They deserve it. And don't look now, but this was the toughest test. And even if they lose the Virginia game, they're looking at a schedule until SEC play where a road game against Dallas Baptist is really the only thing standing between them and SEC play. They've got a real chance to go into SEC play, which is a road series at South Carolina, which I believe you'll be there for at least part of that series, Mark.
I'm there Sunday.
Yeah. So they're going to go into that series most likely with a pretty good head of steam, and that's huge. So excited to see more from this team. Really, really impressive stuff this weekend, especially if it'll just be huge if this lineup can continue to produce the way it has. I think the pace will slow down in SEC play, because how could it not when you're facing SEC pitching? But, nothing but positive signs so far. Before we get on to anything else here, Mark, a quick word from one of our other sponsors, in addition to Academy Sports and Outdoors, and that's Tecovas. There's nothing like the smell of fresh cut grass at a college baseball stadium. And if you're like us, there's another smell that just hits different, real quality leather. That's exactly what you get with Tecovas boots, handcrafted with over 200 steps. They're made for broken-in comfort right out of the box. Whether it's a long day at the ballpark or a big night out, these boots are built to last and impress. Anywhere worth going is worth going in good boots. Those are words to live by, frankly. Find your perfect pair today at Tecovas. Okay, Mark, let's talk Alabama in Jacksonville. This is a team that I got a good look at this weekend. They went 3-0. Honestly, today's win against Ohio State, one of the handful of the best games I've ever seen in person. It wasn't always pretty. Ohio State, even early in the game, was really bobbing and weaving out of trouble because there were a decent number of walks. But, man, just no quit for Alabama. Down 10-0 in the fourth. I mean, how many times do you see it? You get down that much and things you just kind of pack it in, bad at bats, unfocused, and it just, you're never back in the game. But they never did quit. And then, Will Hodo hits a ball off the construction site behind the right field wall, and they walk it off 12-10. But within that result, and I wrote about this today, it's up on the site now as you listen to this. Within that, there were a few things that really struck me. And one is Justin LeBron, really put the team on his back in the middle of this game to get them back in this game. 2 3-run homers, both to the opposite field gap. Both were absolutely hammered. The first one was 438. I didn't catch the distance on the second one, but just absolutely hammered. So 6 runs, accounting there to get them back in the game. That was one thing that stood out to me. The other is the entire weekend for Brennan Norton, the Jacksonville State transfer. Had a chance to talk to him a couple times in postgame and hear Rob Vaughn talk about him. Rob Vaughn threw a Kevin Millar comp on him just for being like the personality guy. And man, he's right. just the little bit I interacted with Brennan Norton, that is a spot on comparison there. And my final thought before I throw it to you, Mark, because I'm curious for your thoughts from someone who wasn't there in person. I think this Alabama bullpen has a chance to be really interesting. I'm not sure I've ever seen a bullpen that provides the opponent with more different looks, right? You've got, Carson Osmer, who's like 3/4 righty. You've got Bo Bryans, who's pretty much the same thing on the left side. You've got guys who throw, gas over the top. You've got, a lefty in Matthew Heiberger that, will run that sinker, like crazy to the arm side. I could go on and on. So there's that. Like they don't have the stuff of Arkansas or Georgia or any of those guys, but man, they show you something different with every guy in the game. And then I think a key piece of this deal could be Aiden Moza, because last year was so tough for him. But Rob Vaughn made a good point of some of the peripheral numbers weren't too bad for Moza. It was just a season that got away from him. And this is me saying this now. Like, he didn't forget how to pitch. The stuff is still good. Like, he was still touching the mid-90s with a fastball. The cutter was an effective pitch for him. He can still spin a breaking ball at 3,000 RPMs.
Mm-hmm.
And, he showed something today where he comes in that fourth inning where Alabama gave up 7 runs. The first batter he faces hits a 3-run homer off him. And then he just goes back out there and gets 10 straight outs.
Yeah.
And look, Rob Vaughn made the point in post game that he could have just been like, "Oh Lord, here we go again," and he didn't. And so he was a guy 2 years ago that was really important for that bullpen, and last year just didn't go his way. But if he's back and doing what he can do, I mean, that's a really valuable piece. So I came away, yes, Zane Adams was good. Yes, Riley Quick is on the mend and is looking better and better every week. But the bullpen really struck me as something that might be really valuable for Alabama this year. And they're trying everybody. They've thrown 18 relievers this year. So they're getting a look at everybody on the staff, and good for them. But your thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, well, certainly it was not a pretty game or really a pretty weekend for Alabama from the standpoint of they struck out a lot. They left a ton of runners on base. What in today's game, it was, well, one, you fall behind 10-0, and you're thinking about when's the last time you were run ruled, right? And then a few minutes later, you're winning the game. But I think the other part of that is if you can have those kinds of troubles and still find ways to win, and that says a lot about a club, that when you don't play your A game, that you're not getting blown off the map. And I do think that that's a sign of growth from a program standpoint, that you don't have to play perfect to win, because there's certainly, once conference play starts, that the other team is going to make you not play perfect. And I feel like that's something that Alabama did. I mean, Justin LeBron, you mentioned it, man. I mean, he really did put on a cape and was a superstar. And he's definitely plays with a swagger. He plays with an edge. And because of that, with all that raw ability, and he's, he was good right away last year, and he's even taken that next step because the ball was just different off his bat this year. He's what you're looking for, right, in a superstar shortstop. And Alabama really hasn't had a hitter of that ilk, who's also, who's that talented. They've had some very productive hitters, but no one with that kind of upside. I think the other thing I would point out is it's an older team, not necessarily at Alabama, although they do have some continuity from a year ago, like Will Hodo, who was the hero. But it's people who played a lot elsewhere. And, you mentioned Brennan Norton. I mean, he had a grand slam stolen from him today. What an incredible play by the Ohio State left fielder to go over the wall and bring it back. And so that was taken off the board, right? And then earlier, Ohio State had a great diving catch that with 2 outs that would have scored a couple runners, right? I mean, so it was kind of one of those deals where things were going against Alabama, where they were leaving runners on base, or Ohio State was just taking it, right? And they were able to fight through it and not think about run rule, but instead think about a way to get back in it. And then they got there. They got some help from some walks, but the home runs helped. Well, the home runs were the primary reason they were able to get back in it. That and the bullpen was just able to keep putting zeros up when it was really ugly there for a couple of innings. I do feel like Riley Quick is, because of that velocity and because of the hard slider, he's a guy who can match up, right? We already know Zane Adams. We feel like he's going to be one of the better Friday starters in the conference, and now you've got a guy potentially in Quick who's right there, who could give them that 1-2 punch. And then Sunday, who knows, right? But they certainly have a lot of options, and this is the kind of club that they've got so much in relief that they could throw 8 or 9 guys at you on Sunday, and really not you wouldn't feel too bad about it, because as you mentioned, they're all a little different, and playing the matchups, you're not going to run out of guys, and that's always the concern on Sunday. I don't think Alabama's going to run out. They may not always be effective, but they're going to have guys they like in those matchups. So, yeah, a big win. They've got a chance to continue on a roll. They're going to be favored certainly in their weekend sets. They have some some challenging midweek games, but I do feel like they could have a pretty gaudy record when conference play starts.
Yeah, I think they definitely will. I was looking ahead at that, and it's a pretty favorable schedule. They'll have the wind at their back, and I wanted to give one more shout out actually that I failed to mention when I set the table with Alabama, and that's that Cade Snell was really impressive today. A guy who actually put up decent numbers last year, but was out for part of the year, and it just felt like he was a pretty reasonably regarded JUCO recruit last year that kind of got lost in the shuffle for them. But man, the way he handles the bat is so impressive. He's not really flashy. Like he's not out there doing the things that Justin LeBron is doing, obviously offensively, but like he just does a really nice job. And the last thing I'll say too is this is not a Big Ten podcast, so I won't expound on this. I'll leave that to Patrick and Burke, but Ohio State's good. Like they were predicted towards the bottom of the Big Ten, and I would have too. That's not a shot at anybody. Like I would have picked that too. They were a lot better than I thought they'd be. They've got athletes all over the field. The guy who robbed the home run is really a catcher. They've got that guy in left field, and he, robbing home runs. Their center fielder made an incredible Superman catch. They had their shortstop make a sliding catch, like dealing with the bullpen mound, like about 200 feet away from home plate. I think that's a win that's going to age well. I don't know if they'll be a regional team or not. Like I don't know enough to predict that, but if you think, man, we had to fight back from 10-0 against Ohio State, like I do think that's going to end up being a pretty good team. I came away impressed with them all weekend. Let's talk Arkansas, Mark. Yeah. They had an eventful weekend at Globe Life Field. They started off with a 2-1 loss to K-State, and when compounded with a narrow win against TCU, or I'm sorry, not a 3-2 loss to K-State, when compounded with a 2-1 win over TCU, I got a lot of questions on weekend waypoints this morning about, hey, is this like, part 3 of kind of this Arkansas, pitches great and can't always score runs saga. And I kind of said, well, we have to give it time. We don't know yet. But I think today, and again, another Big Ten team will have to figure out, like, I don't know how good Michigan is or isn't, but certainly today, with the way they swung the bats, I think has to give them a little bit more, confidence in what they have. And given that today that the pitching staff wasn't quite as solid for Arkansas, I think that was a sight for sore eyes for those in Fayetteville that, hey, you needed a little offense today and you got it. Come hell or high water, like, they got the runs they needed in a game in which the pitching staff wasn't able to hold the opponent to, 3 or fewer or what have you. And look, I understand the anxiety about it, but I do think you have to look at today as a real positive and them getting out of there with a 2-1 record for the weekend.
Yeah, that's well said. Certainly, you score 4 runs in the first 2 games. You're lucky that you won one of them. So, getting the outburst today. I mean, the Eloy brothers. I mean, they are carrying that offense. It seems like it. Really been a huge story. I guess the negative part of this is Gage Wood left after 2 innings. I haven't heard an update yet. They probably don't have one yet, but that's something that we've got to monitor because he was looking really, really good both last week and this week as their 3rd starter. So obviously they have the depth to withstand, a loss, but you don't want to lose a guy like that. There's just not many of those out there. So I guess the point on Arkansas is, yes, it's early. The offense will look a lot different in April and May. Even the lineup is going to probably look different than it is now. We just have to be patient and see. I know everybody wants to have the hot take and go ahead and have the final answer right now, and we don't have enough information for that. Sorry, but that's just not how this works. I do feel like that Arkansas, with the talent that they have and the different ways that they can score, they can hit some home runs as we saw some this weekend. But that's an athletic lineup. I think they've got some skill sets that they're not going to have to sit around and wait, for somebody to double to the wall. They're going to be able to manufacture some stuff with some aggression, and that's how, while you don't want to be over reliant on that, it is a tool that's going to come in handy in these games, especially against these pitchers that are really, really dealing. So, again, Arkansas, this was a positive weekend for them despite the loss to Kansas State. And it was weird that they played Kansas State and TCU, which probably brought all of these, bad memories up based on their last two postseason years, right? So, but yeah, I do feel I don't feel any worse about Arkansas, even though they didn't hit, but maybe even a little bit more positive based on today, assuming Wood is back.
Yeah, the Arkansas beat guys who were there for post game. He's getting an MRI on his shoulder. It's shoulder, not elbow, which doesn't necessarily mean better, but it not being elbow doesn't mean, oh, he just popped his arm and it's Tommy John, right? Shoulder can also be serious, but Dave Van Horn also said that the doctors, and this is, I think that the direct quote is, they feel good about it. I don't know what that means, but I'm taking that. More positive than not. So hopefully, it was just super cautious and everything turns out fine. And the fact that they were still able to win the game, I think speaks to their quality. The other interesting thing, or the other thing I talked about this morning on Weekend Waypoints that I think is just something that the Arkansas faithful is going to have to kind of live with, is even in a best case scenario for this lineup, whatever you think that is, this team is built to win games like they won against TCU. Now, you'd rather it be 4-1 or 5-1 or whatever, but this team is not going to win games the way that, last year's Georgia did. Like, they're never going to be that explosive offense that is going to bludgeon teams. That's just not how this team is built. And so, again, yes, we can nitpick and say, I'd like it to be not 2-1, and I get that, but also this is just kind of what this team is. And so I think that there's going to have to be some level of acceptance that this is just the way the roster is built, unless, as someone brought up on Waypoints, they can find 7 more Alloy brothers, at which point they will be in great shape. Because those two guys right now are like the Bash brothers right now. It's
killing it.
They're the 2 top hitters on the team right now in a literal sense. So, I don't know how many more Alloy brothers there are, but hopefully Arkansas can bring in some others.
Yeah. To your point there, I mean, I realize expectations in Fayetteville are different than in other places, but how many teams out there wish they could win 2-1 ball games, and Arkansas, they just kind of take it for granted and complain about it, right? Because of all the scar tissue that's lingering from the past years. It's cool that you can win 2-1. That's a real positive. You just don't want to have to do it every week. And I think that's kind of where people are. They're thinking, all right, well, yeah, it would be nice to beat somebody, and score a bunch of runs and relax and not be biting your nails in the ninth. And that's, there will be days like that. And I do feel like this is a team that can do it.
Real quick, one last thing on this, Mark. What did you? We don't need to belabor it because at this point it's all been all around social media. What did you make of the Cam Kojal play at first base? Where, I mean, I still don't really know how he ended up on the ground. Like, we didn't get a good camera shot. Somehow he ends up on the ground. Yeah. Like, anyway, like, what was your general take there?
I don't know what the runner could do. I really don't know what the runner could do there. because we added a base. Okay, we have the safety bag as well, and Kojal was blocking both. Okay, and he's really, the way the rule is written, assuming I understand it correctly, the fielder gets the white bag, the runner gets the colored bag, and the explanation that the umpires gave to TCU was that the runner could have gone to the white bag, but that's not the way it's written. So I think there's going to be some interpretations come from this and some learning opportunities. And I do feel like it sucks for TCU because they were on the wrong end of this, and it may not have affected the game anyway, right? But you never know. But I do feel like this is one of these learning opportunities with a new rule. And but yeah, if that's not interference, I'm not sure what interference is.
Yeah, I said in our internal chat, if that's not obstruction, I'm not sure how Kojal could have obstructed worse. Like I guess he could have laid flat across both bags, but yeah, I'm with you. I think the explanation sounds not correct, and then even if it is, let's just say that it is. I don't agree with the interpretation. Like, I don't think there was a lane there on the white bag because the runner had to slow down to try not to, frankly, injure Cam Kojal.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So, anyway, it ultimately, like, we don't know that it affected the game, but I said on Waypoints this morning, I don't know that Arkansas or TCU was going to score again regardless. So, maybe it didn't matter, but I think they'll get that cleaned up. It sucks.
It gave us something to talk about.
It really did.
And us and everyone else, everyone who saw it had, it's definitely one of those polarizing moments, right? Where you're going to have an opinion one way or the other.
Yeah. All right, Mark, let's kind of whip around the rest of the results here. I've got them in a couple different buckets. And for those listening, we'll move through this stuff pretty quickly. We apologize if we don't go deep on your particular team. It's just that, we can't go through
better.
We can't go through Mark's. That was Mark, that said that, not Joe.
You want airtime? Play somebody with a pulse.
Long story short, if we went through 16 teams in depth, we'd be here all night. So we'll conference play is coming up, and I promise you when conference play comes, we cover everything a lot more in depth. But all right, Mark, so I'm going to read off the sweeps we had this weekend, and then you tell me of those what thoughts you have on one or a couple of them. So here we go. We had Georgia 4-game sweep over UIC. We had Florida 3-game sweep over Dayton. We had Tennessee sweeping Samford. Samford hung around, I would say, in that series, but a sweep for Tennessee. Texas narrowly over Dartmouth in 3 games. That was weird. Ole Miss over Eastern Kentucky. Vanderbilt over St. Mary's, another series kind of like Tennessee-Samford, where St. Mary's hung around a couple times, but ultimately got swept. South Carolina over Milwaukee. Kentucky over Belmont. Mississippi State over Missouri State, and Auburn over Wright State. Of those sweeps, Mark, what stands out to you?
I think Tennessee, they got pushed, and they needed to be, right? Because the first few games have been all run rules or really close to it. And Samford hung with them for certainly all of the first 2 games, and then for a while there on game 3 before Tennessee just kind of bludgeoned them at the end. So that was good. They needed to be in a fight, and a lot of new players, different roles. That was important. I think another one, Auburn, playing against Wright State. That was Wright State, their program with some respect because of what they've been able to do in postseason play. And Auburn played well and had some. I think were they all run rules or really close to it? I think today wasn't. Today was closer, but I do feel like Auburn grew. They got to play a lot of players. They did it without Cade Fisher, who they gave a week off. He's kind of nursing something. So I feel like that was good for them. I guess the other one would call out of this group would be Kentucky. They finally got to play. They only had 2 games. Some of these teams are, they already played 5 and 6 games, heading into the weekend, and Kentucky was stuck on 2 because of bad weather. So for them to go to Belmont and pick up a sweep, that was important. One, to get the games in, but 2, to play, play well and be in a position where they can have some momentum.
I'm with you on all of that. I highlighted Kentucky over Belmont as well, because I also liked, you're right about getting games in. I also liked, from their standpoint, they won a game 2-1. They won a game by run rule. And then on Sunday, they made a comeback to win. And so they get 3 different game types, and they won all 3. I mentioned Ben Cleaver on my weekend waypoints this morning. That's a guy to watch. Kentucky might have something there. I know you talked to Nick Mingione, and he was really high on him. So there might be something there. The slender lefty who, probably would have had a role to play last year had he not been dealing with injury. So that's something to watch. And I'll just shrug my shoulders and say I'm not really sure what the deal was with Texas against Dartmouth. It was 3 close games. They didn't score hardly at all. And pitching, which I guess you can look at that a couple of different ways. You could look at it as that's great because we didn't know if they could win games with pitching, but also should you have to win games with pitching against when your lineup is as good as it is? I don't know what to make of that, but at least they got out of it with a sweep.
Yeah, in Dartmouth, had they been outside all year, and then they come down and, play Texas off their feet for 3 games. I guess the other one I would mention of the sweeps this weekend would be Mississippi State, because Missouri State's we feel like they're pretty good. They've got a chance to win the Missouri Valley and be in a regional, and certainly have some, they've got some players. And Mississippi State, they were pushed at times and had to fight and had to use some different guys on the mound and had to get some clutch hits and all of those things that are going to pay off, you hope, later in the season. So that was, that was certainly a good outcome for the folks in Starkville.
Couple teams took a loss but won series. That would be A&M losing a game to Cal Poly, LSU losing a game to Omaha. I think I know the answer here, but I just have to ask kind of that requisite question of, is there any particular worry in either of those cases?
No, I think for A&M, the expectations are just so high, and the offense hasn't, how could they meet those lofty goals, right? We were talking, everybody in the lineup was going to hit double-digit home runs, and 5 or 6 of them are going to have 20, and all these crazy numbers. And all of that is still possible, but it hasn't reflected that to this point. So I just feel like they need to settle down. Maybe a loss is a good thing for them. Kind of takes some of that heat off. And hey, we are not going to go undefeated this year. Well, you kind of know that, but sometimes the loss is a good learning tool. With LSU, that was such an odd game. They were getting no hit, and it was a 0-0 game into the 8th inning, or 7th or 8th, something like that. So it was just, that should not happen. And certainly that was the first game of a doubleheader, and I can imagine the time between games was not fun for those players and that coaching staff. To their credit, they came back. It was just a little bit too big a hole. It was 5-4, and they had the winning run on first base when the game ended. So, when you lose a game that you shouldn't, you try to find areas to learn from, and you had some positive, and you also had some negative, because you pitched really well other than a couple of innings, or really 1 inning, and you got beat. I do think that, if LSU and A&M, for this matter, this could apply to either one. If they're going to get where they need to go, they're going to have to handle those losses and learn from them, because those are coming. because as good as those teams are, and they are two of the best in the country, they're going to get pounded occasionally because the league is so good. And you're going to go on the road, and somebody's going to have an ace, and you're not going to have an answer for him, right? And so, how do you respond to that? I think is going to be a big part for both of these clubs.
I think that's right. I'm with you that I don't have any particular worry. It's early, it's cold, it's hard to get up for these games.
Yeah.
In A&M's case, Cal Poly is not, a rollover. So there are little things you can say here and there, but ultimately the biggest thing is just like it's early and there's never been an undefeated national champion. So
this is not football.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we're not. That's not how we track this. So You move on. I put Missouri in its own bucket. They technically won a series over the weekend, but they got blown off the field by Alabama State on Saturday. And I went into the weekend kind of thinking, all right, look, you got waxed in the midweek, or I guess it was a Thursday, by UCF. But hey, you're gonna go to the Andre Dawson Classic. You're going to get 3 wins. You're going to kind of get right, reset, and then go from there. And it just didn't. They squeaked by FAMU on Friday. They got blown off the field on Saturday. They got a big, they bludgeoned Southern on Sunday, but it was just not. That's one where it's like, this is different. Like, is there concern? Yes, just because that's just a team that even with a team that is outmanned talent-wise within the context of the SEC, those are 3 teams that you should go down there and be able to handle, and they just didn't.
Yeah. The fact that they lost is not as concerning as how they lost. I mean, they got out hit like 17-5. The score was lopsided. They were dominated, and that's the part, because there's not a player on Alabama State's team that Missouri would have recruited. Right? That's how this works. The difference in the talent level between those 2 programs are so. I mean, and Alabama ruled Alabama State, earlier this week. So it's just not. It's not a good look. Everybody loses games they shouldn't. This is baseball. That's not the concerning part. It's the optics of it, right? And it gives you pause about what's going to happen when you start playing these teams that are way better, right? And that's the problem. When they were the unanimous choice for the 16th team in the best conference in the country, and in the back of my head, I'm thinking, well, all of us won't be right. Okay. They're going to upset somebody. They're going to win enough games, and somebody else is going to drop. We don't know who that's going to be. And they're going to finish 14th or 15th or something like that. And I'm beginning to have my doubts whether that's in store for Missouri this season. I feel like they're going to have a lot of long days.
Very well may be the case. There's also time. The good news is there's also time for them to surprise us and turn things around. That's the beauty of it. But it's a good point you make, because how different is Omaha versus Alabama State?
Right.
And the answer is we don't know, right? Because you and I are not, well versed on those rosters. But it's that LSU lost by a run, clawed its way back in that game, kind of refused to lay down, and Missouri just was not competitive. And so, that's the difference there. So it's a good point. It's a good point you make. Yeah. It's still time to turn it around. They get to, hopefully, even for their sake, fingers crossed, play some home games here coming up. And maybe that'll be what that
may be the magic elixir, right? There may be a different team at home, and they've had success at home. So that can be, especially early in the conference season, that's a tough place to play. And if some of these new players, they continue their ascension as they get more at bats, get more innings, maybe that's just maybe this weekend was just, or this Saturday was just one hiccup on the route to recovery. You have to hit rock bottom before you recover, right? And Saturday seemed like rock bottom.
Yeah, no doubt about that. They have 4 losses this year. 3 of them have been blowouts against Penn State, against UCF. UCF was 7-1, but I watched most of that game and it was not that
It
close.
was not competitive.
Yeah. And then of course the Alabama State loss. They've got Evansville this weekend at home. This coming weekend. That'll be interesting because Evansville is not what Evansville was last year because they graduated a whole bunch of dudes.
Yep.
So that'll be interesting. Like because I also think Evansville's still decent, and they have pitching left over from last year. So that's an interesting kind of litmus test for Mizzou moving forward. So we will see how that shakes out. That is going to do it. As one last Oklahoma update, still tied as they're in the 12th.
We're into the 12th.
So the result, but Mark and I don't yet. So, but an impressive weekend for Oklahoma nonetheless. Kudos to the Sooners. But that is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I want to thank our sponsors for the show. I failed to mention it up top, but you see their logo there if you're watching. Academy Sports and Outdoors. Really excited to have them on board. I mention it every time because I am genuinely excited to have them on board, a brand that I have strong feelings for and fond memories of going back to my childhood on the Gulf Coast. So excited to have them here. And then Tecovas boots. Nothing like the smell of fresh leather, whether it's a baseball glove or a good pair of boots. So thank you to Tecovas boots as well. Thank you to Mark, as always, for joining me. And thank you, the listener, for listening. We'll talk.